Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries. It's RPG a Day, Day 18. And the question for Day 18 is, which RPG have you played the most in your life? Now, this is a difficult question because I've played an awful lot of RPGs over the course of my time playing. However, when I think back to the one that has the most sort of games and the most sort of sessions that stick in my mind, I inevitably come back to this here. Now, for those of you who don't recognise this, this is the Mind's Eye Theatre version of Laws of the Night, effectively a live action version of the rules for Old World of Darkness Vampire the Masquerade. Now, back in the day when the Old World of Darkness, or Core World of Darkness, or whatever they're calling it now, was in its heyday, they had the Mind's Eye Theatre books for pretty much all of the different game lines. So Wraith, Werewolf, Hunter the Reckoning. I think they stopped just before they did Demon the Fallen on the Tabletop Rage. I certainly don't ever remember seeing a Mind's Eye Theatre version of the rules for that. However, the first sort of game that I was introduced to that I wasn't basically running was Laws of the Night. It was a person who later became a friend of mine was running a live action Sabbat game at a local hotel, now sadly no longer there, in my hometown. And I met a couple of people while I was out an evening out in town, and they said, this person's running a game, you should come along to it, see what you think. And I turned up not really knowing what to expect. I threw a few numbers down on a character sheet and ended up with a fairly random sort of Brujar character with a hideous appearance and primarily social traits which he couldn't use because of his monstrous appearance flaw, and he had a skull face and all manner of tragically angsty stuff that I hadn't yet realised was quite so cliched. But I had a blast playing that character. I played a number of other characters in that game before it unfortunately wound to a close, but there were numerous other Laws of the Night games, whether it be Vampire, Werewolf, that all seemed to be sort of going on around this time period in my hometown, and I remember quite a lot of them very well and with a great degree of fondness. I've even helped run a few recently, fairly recently, with friends up in Derby. Very much enjoyed those, although as with any game, the difficulty of sort of getting a group of people who've got increasingly hectic lives, commitments, etc. together is only amplified when you're running something like Laws of the Night. So let's talk a bit about what the actual system was like. Well, I think it was a least worst option, to be perfectly honest. Having played a lot of games of it, effectively, instead of rolling dice or anything, which is obviously not ideal in a live action scenario, it used a rock, paper, scissors system. The idea being that when you wanted to do a challenge against someone, you'd do a rock, paper, scissors test against them. If you won, you won. If you lost, you lost. If you drew, then you would compare your traits, physical, mental or social, and whoever had the highest would win. Now, there were a few complications to this system. Of course, there were, that they couldn't keep it simple. If you had like double the number of traits, I believe it was, say I'm going on my slightly poor memory, you could try and overbid someone, which would give you a retest. If you had dots in various skills, like say you engaged in a physical brawl style challenge with someone and you had 3 dots in brawl, you could spend those to gain a retest, but you can only use each dot once over the course of the evening. And the disciplines, powers, whatever, all had their own different rules. Now, this game was very clearly intended for a sort of parlour style of live action game, where the majority of the evening is spent in discussion rather than any sort of high action. And now, I'm not saying that you can't run a high action game. However, the point where this game tended to break down was as soon as you got into a combat. Because effectively you had to do the combat in rounds. That's the only way the rules worked, which again isn't ideal for a live action situation. But each person could move 3 paces around and take 1 action. Unless they had something like celerity, superhuman speed, etc., which allowed them to take more than 1 action. Now, ironically, if you had a few people with celerity, in actual real time, the combat would take massively longer to resolve, to the point when an entire evening could be chewed up just dealing with like a single combat with only a handful of participants on each side. And that was one of the real sort of downfalls of the system in my mind. And the sort of parlour style game was okay when you were sort of dealing with like a Camarilla game where it was all wheeling and dealing and politics and stuff like that. However, it didn't really work in the Sabbat game, which tend to be a lot more action orientated. And let's face it, if you give role players a character with some cool powers, eventually they're just going to want to go, forget this talking malarkey, let's bust out the Protean and the Potents and let's get vampiric with it and let's just go crazy. And that would happen, but as soon as that did happen, the speed of play would just grind to a halt almost. And I'm not saying the sessions couldn't be enjoyable, because with a bit of sort of tongue-in-cheek humour to it, they could be. And I really enjoyed like 99% of the games that I played with Laws of the Night. However, I don't think it was an ideal system. I believe some sort of version of Laws of the Night or some sort of live action system they attempted to resurrect for the New World of Darkness using, I think it was cards or something like that. I don't really know the details, but I seem to recall that sort of sunk below the waterline and disappeared from trace, so I can assume it wasn't that popular. Although if I'm wrong, feel free to correct me in the comments down below. It's entirely possible. Like I say, I've not really been involved in a live action game of Vampire or anything like that for ages, but we still had fun with this set of rules, or rather despite this set of rules, and I still have very fond and nostalgic memories about it. So there we are. That's my answer for day 18. Which RPG have you played most in your life? In some form or other, it would be Laws of the Night, the live action roleplay rules for Vampire and the Old World of Darkness. So I hope if you've enjoyed this video, you consider clicking on the thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. Until I see you next time, take care and happy gaming. And we hope if you've enjoyed this video, you'll check out some of the others on Red Dice Diaries. Take care.